And we want to welcome you to Washington University in St. Louis for the second presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
The last presidential debate could have been rated as MA, mature audiences, per TV parental guidelines. Do you feel you're modeling appropriate and positive behavior for today's youth?
I have a very positive and optimistic view about what we can do together. That's why the slogan of my campaign is Stronger Together. And I can promise you, I will work with every American. I want to be the president for all Americans, because that's, I think, the best way for us to get the future that our children and our grandchildren deserve.
Mr. Trump, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I actually agree with that. I agree with everything she said. And my whole concept was to make America great again. We're going to make great trade deals. We're going to have a strong border. We're going to bring back law and order. And I look forward to doing it. It's called Make America Great Again.
We received a lot of questions online, Mr. Trump, about the tape that was released on Friday. As you can imagine, you called what you said locker room banter. You described kissing women without consent, grabbing their genitals. That is sexual assault. You bragged that you have sexually assaulted women. Do you understand that?
No, I didn't say that at all. I don't think you understood what was said. This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people. Certainly, I'm not proud of it. We have a world where you have ISIS chopping off heads. Yes, I'm very embarrassed by it. I hate it, but it's locker room talk, and it's one of those things. I will knock the hell out of ISIS. I will take care of ISIS.
So, Mr. Trump,
we should get on to much more important things and much bigger things.
Just for the record, though, are you saying that what you said on that bus 11 years ago, that you did not actually kiss women without consent or grope women without consent?
I have great respect for women. Nobody has more respect for women than I do.
So for the record, you're saying you never did that?
Things that, frankly, you hear these things are said. And I was embarrassed by it, but I have tremendous respect for women.
Have you ever done those things?
Women have respect for me. And I will tell you, no, I have not.
Secretary Clinton, do you want to respond?
You know, with prior Republican nominees for president, I disagreed with them, but I never questioned their fitness to serve. Donald Trump is different. I said starting back in June that he was not fit to be president and commander-in-chief. And he has said that the video doesn't represent who he is. We have seen him insult women. We've seen him rate women on their appearance. We've seen him embarrass women on TV and on Twitter. We saw him after the first debate spend nearly a week denigrating a former Miss Universe in the harshest, most personal terms. So, yes, this is who Donald Trump is. He has also targeted immigrants, African Americans, Latinos, people with disabilities, POWs, Muslims, and so many others. This is not who we are.
It's just words, folks. It's just words. Those words, I've been hearing them for many years. I've heard them where Hillary's constantly talking about the inner cities of our country. I'm going to help the African Americans. I'm going to help the Latinos, Hispanics. She's done a terrible job for the African Americans. We saw that firsthand when she was a United States Senator. She campaigned where the
Mr. Trump, I want to get to audience questions and online questions.
So she's allowed to do that, but I'm not allowed to respond.
You're going to get to respond right now.
That sounds fair.
Trump says the campaign has changed him. When did that happen? So, Mr. Trump, let me add to that. When you walked off that bus at age 59, were you a different man, or did that behavior continue until just recently?
That was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. If you look at Bill Clinton, far worse, minor words, and his was action. His was what he's done to women. There's never been anybody in the history of politics in this nation that's been so abusive to women. Hillary Clinton attacked those same women and attacked them viciously. 4 of them here tonight. One of the women, who is a wonderful woman, at 12 years old, was raped at 12. Her client, she represented, got him off, and she's seen laughing on 2 separate occasions, laughing at the girl who was raped. So don't tell me about words. I apologize for those words. But what President Clinton did, he was impeached, he lost his license to practice law, he had to pay an $850,000 fine to one of the women, Paula Jones, who's also here tonight. When Hillary brings up a point like that, and she talks about words that I said 11 years ago, I think it's disgraceful, and I think she should be ashamed of herself, if you want to know the truth.
Can we please hold the applause?
When I hear something like that, I am reminded of what my friend Michelle Obama advised us all. When they go low, you go high. If this were just about one video, maybe what he's saying tonight would be understandable. But everyone can draw their own conclusions at this point about whether or not the man in the video or the man on the stage respects women. He never apologized to Mr. and Mrs. Khan, and Donald insulted and attacked them for weeks over their religion. And he never apologized for the racist lie that President Obama was not born in the United States of America. He owes the president an apology. He owes our country an apology.
You really owe him an apology. You're the one that sent the pictures around your campaign, sent the pictures around with President Obama in a certain garb. Go back and take a look at those commercials. A race where you lost, fair and square, unlike the Bernie Sanders race where you won, but not fair and square, in my opinion. Bernie Sanders, between superdelegates and Deborah Wasserman Schultz, he never had a chance, and I was so surprised to see him sign on with the devil. I think the one that you should really be apologizing for, and the thing that you should be apologizing for, are the 33,000 emails that you deleted and that you acid washed. But if I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. You get a subpoena, and after getting the subpoena, you delete 33,000 emails. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Secretary Clinton,
Because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised. Really? In the first debate,
the audience needs to calm down here.
Last time at the first debate, we had millions of people fact-checking, so I expect we'll have millions more fact-checking because it's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton. And Secretary Clinton, I do want to follow up on emails. You disagreed with FBI Director James Comey, calling your handling of classified information, quote, extremely careless. The FBI said that there were 110 classified emails that were exchanged, 8 of which were top secret, and that it was possible hostile actors did gain access to those emails. You don't call that extremely careless?
That was a mistake, and I take responsibility for using a personal email account. After a year-long investigation, there is no evidence that anyone hacked the server I was using. I take classified materials very seriously.
She didn't know the letter C on a document. And she's lying again because she said what she did with the emails was fine. You think it was fine to delete 33,000 emails? I don't think so. And more importantly, that was after getting a subpoena. That wasn't before. That was after. She got it from the United States Congress. But for you to say that there was nothing wrong with you deleting 39,000 emails, again, you should be ashamed of yourself.
It's just not true, and so please
go you didn't delete them?
Allow her to respond, please.
Personal emails, not official.
33,000?
Well, we turned over 35,000, so it was.
What about the other 15,000?
Please allow her to respond. She didn't talk while you talked.
Yes, that's true. I didn't. And I did it in the first debate, and I'd like to get to the questions that the people have brought here tonight to talk to us about.
And get off this question.
Okay, Donald, I know you're into big diversion tonight, anything to avoid talking about your campaign and the way it's exploding and the way Republicans are leaving you. But let's at least focus on some of the issues that people care about tonight. Let's get to their questions.
I'd like to know, Anderson, why aren't you bringing up the emails? I'd like to know. Why aren't you
We brought up the emails.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. And it hasn't been finished at all.
Ken Karpowitz has a question.
It's nice to 1 on 3.
Thank you. Premiums have gone up. Deductibles have gone up. Co-pays have gone up. What will you do to bring the costs down and make coverage better?
That first one goes to Secretary Clinton because you started out the last one to the audience.
If he wants to start, he can start.
Go ahead, Hillary.
No, go ahead, Donald.
No, I'm a gentleman, Hillary. Go ahead.
Secretary Clinton?
When the Affordable Care Act passed, it wasn't just that 20 million people got insurance who didn't have it before, but that in and of itself was a good thing. But everybody else, the 170 million of us, got big benefits. Number one, insurance companies can't deny you coverage because of a pre-existing condition. Number two, no lifetime limits. Number three, women can't be charged more than men for our health insurance, which is the way it used to be before the Affordable Care Act. So I want very much to save what works and is good about the Affordable Care Act. But if we repeal it, as Donald has proposed, and start over again, all of those benefits I just mentioned are lost to everybody.
Their method of fixing it is to go back and ask Congress for more money, more and more money. And we have right now almost $20 trillion in debt. We have to repeal it and replace it with something absolutely much less expensive. We have to get rid of the lines around the state, artificial lines, where we stop insurance companies from coming in and competing. You will have the finest health care plan there is. She wants to go to a single-payer plan, which would be a disaster.
Secretary Clinton, let me follow up with you. Your husband called Obamacare, quote, the craziest thing in the world. Was he mistaken, or was his mistake simply telling the truth?
No, I mean, he clarified what he meant, and it's very clear. Look.
You said you want to end Obamacare. You've said you want to end Obamacare. You've also said you want to make coverage accessible for people with pre-existing conditions. How do you force insurance companies to do that if you're no longer mandating that every American get insurance?
You're going to have plans.
What does that mean?
Well, I'll tell you what it means. You're going to have plans that are so good because we're going to have so much competition in the insurance industry once we break out the lines and allow the competition to come. When we get rid of those lines, you will have competition, and we will be able to keep pre-existing. We'll also be able to help people that don't have money, because we are going to have people protected. We're going to block grant into the states. We're going to block grant into Medicaid into the states so that we will be able to take care of people without the necessary funds to take care of themselves.
Thank you, Mr.
There are 3.3 million Muslims in the United States, and I'm one of them. How will you help people like me deal with the consequences of being labeled as a threat to the country after the election is over?
Well, you're right about Islamophobia, and that's a shame. But one thing we have to do is we have to make sure that, because there is a problem. I mean, whether we like it or not, and we can be very politically correct, but whether we like it or not, there is a problem. And we have to be sure that Muslims come in and report when they see something going on. These are radical Islamic terrorists, and she won't even mention the word. To solve a problem, you have to be able to state what the problem is, or at least say the name.
Unfortunately, there's been a lot of very divisive, dark things said about Muslims. And even someone like Captain Khan, the young man who sacrificed himself defending our country in the United States Army, has been subject to attack by Donald. We've had Muslims in America since George Washington. And we've had many successful Muslims. We just lost a particularly well-known one with Muhammad Ali. My vision of America is an America where everyone has a place. I intend to defeat ISIS, to do so in a coalition with majority Muslim nations. Right now, a lot of those nations are hearing what Donald says and wondering, why should we cooperate with the Americans? And this is a gift to ISIS and the terrorists. We are not at war with Islam. And it is a mistake, and it plays into the hands of the terrorists to act as though we are.
Mr. Trump, in December, you said this: Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. Your running mate said this week that the Muslim ban is no longer your position. Is that correct?
First of all, Captain Khan is an American hero. And if I were president at that time, he would be alive today. Because unlike her, who voted for the war without knowing what she was doing, I would not have had our people in Iraq. Iraq was a disaster. The Muslim ban is something that in some form has morphed into a extreme vetting. Hillary Clinton wants to allow
And why did it morph into that? No, did you? No, answer the question.
Why
do you still believe?
Her? You
I do.
Me all the time. Why don't you interrupt her?
Would you please explain whether or not the Muslim ban still stands?
It's called extreme vetting. I believe in building safe zones. I believe in having other people pay for them. As an example, the Gulf states who are not carrying their weight, but they have nothing but money.
You have asked for an increase from 10 to 65,000 Syrian refugees. We know you want tougher vetting. That's not a perfect system. So why take the risk of having those refugees come into the country?
Well, first of all, I will not let anyone into our country that I think poses a risk to us. But there are a lot of refugees, women and children. Think of that picture we all saw of that 4-year-old boy with the blood on his forehead because he'd been bombed by the Russian and Syrian air forces. We need to do our part. We by no means are carrying anywhere near the load that Europe and others are. But we will have vetting that is as tough as it needs to be from our professionals, our intelligence experts, and others. We are a country founded on religious freedom and liberty. How do we do what he has advocated without causing great distress within our own country? Are we going to have religious tests when people fly into our country? And what Donald Trump says about Muslims is used to recruit fighters. This is the 10th or 12th time that he's denied being for the war in Iraq. We have it on tape. The entire press corps has looked at it. It's been debunked, but it never stops him from saying whatever he wants to say.
Has not been debunked.
So please
has not been debunked. And
go to HillaryClinton.com and you can see it.
I was against the war in Iraq. Has not been debunked.
This question involves WikiLeaks' release of purported excerpts of Secretary Clinton's paid speeches, and one line in particular in which you, Secretary Clinton, purportedly say you need both a public and private position on certain issues. So, two from Virginia asks, is it okay for politicians to be two-faced? Is it acceptable for a politician to have a private stance on issues?
That was something I said about Abraham Lincoln after having seen the wonderful Steven Spielberg movie called Lincoln. And I was making the point that it is hard sometimes to get the Congress to do what you want to do. And yes, President Lincoln was trying to convince some people. He used some arguments. Convincing other people, he used other arguments. That was a great, I thought, a great display of presidential leadership. Our intelligence community just came out and said in the last few days that the Kremlin, meaning Putin and the Russian government, are directing the attacks, the hacking on American accounts to influence our election. And believe me, they're not doing it to get me elected. They're doing it to try to influence the election for Donald Trump. Now, maybe because he has praised Putin, maybe because he says he agrees with a lot of what Putin wants to do, maybe because he wants to do business in Moscow. I don't know the reasons. We should demand that Donald release all of his tax returns so that people can see what are the entanglements and the financial relationships.
We're going to get to that later.
That he has.
She lied. Now she's blaming the lie on the late, great Abraham Lincoln. That's one that I haven't. Okay, Honest Abe. Honest Abe never lied. That's the good thing. That's the big difference between Abraham Lincoln and you. That's a big, big difference. We're talking about some difference. I don't know Putin. I think it would be great if we got along with Russia. But I notice anytime anything wrong happens, they like to say, the Russians. She doesn't know if it's the Russians doing the hacking. Maybe there is no hacking. I know nothing about Russia. I know about Russia, but I know nothing about the inner workings of Russia. I don't deal there. I have no businesses there. I have no loans from Russia. I pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. But as soon as my routine audit's finished, I'll release my returns. I'll be very proud to.
My question is, what specific tax provisions will you change to ensure the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share in taxes?
Mr. Trump, you have 2 minutes.
Well, one thing I do is get rid of carried interest. One of the greatest provisions for people like me, to be honest with you. And she could have done this years ago, by the way. She was a United States Senator. She complains that Donald Trump took advantage of the tax code. Well, why didn't she change it? Why didn't you change it when you were a senator? The reason you didn't is that all your friends take the same advantage that I do. And I do. And I will tell you, Hillary Clinton is raising your taxes, folks. You can look at me. She's raising your taxes really high. And what that's going to do is a disaster for the country.
Well, everything you've heard just now from Donald is not true. I'm sorry I have to keep saying this, but he lives in an alternative reality. His plan will give the wealthy and corporations the biggest tax cuts they've ever had. And yes, when I was a senator, I did vote to close corporate loopholes. I voted to close, I think, one of the loopholes he took advantage of when he claimed $1 billion loss that enabled him to avoid paying taxes. I want to have a tax on people who are making $1 million. It's called the Buffett rule. I want to have a surcharge on incomes above $5 million. We have to make up for lost time. Since the Great Recession, the gains have all gone to the top.
The New York Times published 3 pages of your 1995 tax return. They show you claimed a $916 million loss, which means you could have avoided paying personal federal income taxes for years. Did you use that $916 million loss to avoid paying personal federal income taxes for years?
Of course I do. Of course I do. And so do all of her donors, or most of her donors. I know many of her donors.
So have you
a lot of my a lot of my write-off was depreciation and other things that Hillary, as a senator, allowed. And she'll always allow it because the people that give her all this money, they want it.
Can you say how many years you have avoided paying personal federal income taxes?
No, but I pay tax and I pay federal tax too. Hey, if she had a problem, for 30 years she's been doing this, Anderson, I say it all the time. She talks about health care. Why didn't she do something about it? She talks about taxes. Why didn't she do something about it? She doesn't do anything about anything other than talk. With her, it's all talk and no action.
In the past,
and again, Bernie Sanders, it's really bad judgment. She has made bad judgment not only on taxes, she's made bad judgments on Libya, on Syria, on Iraq. I mean, her and Obama, whether you like it or not, the way they got out of Iraq, the vacuum they've left, that's why ISIS formed in the first place. They started from that little area, and now they're in 32 different nations.
Well, here we go again. I've been in favor of getting rid of carried interest for years, starting when I was a senator from New York. But that's not the point here.
Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do it?
Because I was a senator with a Republican president.
Oh, really?
I will be the president.
You could have done it. If you were an effective senator, you could have done it.
8 million kids every year have health insurance because when I was First Lady, I worked with Democrats and Republicans to create the Children's Health Insurance Program. Hundreds of thousands of kids now have a chance to be adopted because I worked to change our adoption and foster care system. After 9/11, I went to work with Republican mayor, governor, and president to rebuild New York and to get health care for our first responders who were suffering because they had run toward danger and gotten sickened by it. Hundreds of thousands of National Guard and Reserve members have health care because of work that I did, and children have safer medicines because I was able to pass a law that required the dosing to be more carefully done. When I was Secretary of State, I went around the world advocating for our country, but also advocating for women's rights, and negotiated a treaty with Russia to lower nuclear weapons. I worked very hard and was very proud to be reelected in New York by an even bigger margin than I had been elected the first time.
If you were president, what would you do about Syria and the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo? Isn't it a lot like the Holocaust when the U.S. waited too long before we helped?
So when I was Secretary of State, advocated, and I advocate today, a no-fly zone and safe zones. We need some leverage with the Russians, and we have to work more closely with our partners and allies on the ground. What is at stake here is the ambitions and the aggressiveness of Russia. I've stood up to Russia. I've taken on Putin and others, and I would do that as president.
Now, she talks tough. She talks really tough against Putin and against Assad. She talks in favor of the rebels. She doesn't even know who the rebels are. You know, every time we take rebels, whether it's in Iraq or anywhere else, we're arming people. And you know what happens? They end up being worse than the people. Look at what she did in Libya with Gaddafi.
Mr. Trump, let me repeat the question. If you were president, what would you do about Syria and the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo? And I want to remind you what your running mate said. He said provocations by Russia need to be met with American strength, and that if Russia continues to be involved in airstrikes along with the Syrian government forces of Assad, the United States of America should be prepared to use military force to strike the military targets of the Assad regime.
Okay. He and I haven't spoken, and I disagree. I disagree.
You disagree with your running mate?
I think we have to knock out ISIS. We have to worry about ISIS before we can get too much more involved. She had a chance to do something with Syria. They had a chance, and that was the line.
What do you think will happen if Aleppo falls?
I think Aleppo is a disaster, humanitarian-wise.
What do you think will happen if it falls?
I think that it basically has fallen, okay?
Would you introduce the threat of U.S. military force beyond a no-fly zone against the Assad regime to back up diplomacy?
I would not use American ground forces in Syria. I think that would be a very serious mistake. I do think the use of special forces, which we're using, the use of enablers and trainers in Iraq, which has had some positive effects, are very much in our interests. And so I do support what is happening. I do think that there is a good chance that we can take Mosul. And, you know, Donald says he knows more about ISIS than the generals. No, he doesn't. I would go after Baghdadi. I would specifically target Baghdadi. I would also consider arming the Kurds. The Kurds have been our best partners in Syria as well as Iraq.
Do you believe you can be a devoted president to all the people in the United States?
Absolutely. I mean, she calls our people deplorable, a large group, and irredeemable. And I'll be a president that will turn our inner cities around and will give strength to people and will give economics to people and will bring jobs back, because NAFTA, signed by her husband, is perhaps the greatest disaster trade deal in the history of the world. You go into the inner cities and you see it's 45% poverty. African Americans now, 45% poverty in the inner cities. The education is a disaster. Jobs are essentially non-existent. What do you have to lose? It can't get any worse. And she's been talking about the inner cities for 25 years. Nothing's going to ever happen.
Mr. Carter, I have tried my entire life to do what I can to support children and families. You know, I started off as a young lawyer working against discrimination against African American children in schools and in the criminal justice system. I have worked with Latinos. One of my first jobs in politics was down in South Texas, registering Latino citizens to be able to vote. So I have a deep devotion, to use your absolutely correct word, to making sure that every American feels like he or she has a place in our country. If you don't vote for me, I still want to be your president. I want to be the best president I can be for every American.
Secretary Clinton, your 2 minutes is up. I want to follow up on something that Donald Trump actually said to you, a comment you made last month. You said that half of Donald Trump's supporters are, quote, deplorables, racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic. How can you unite a country if you've written off tens of millions of Americans?
Well, within hours, I said that I was sorry about the way I talked about that, because my argument is not with his supporters. It's with him and with the hateful and divisive campaign that he has run.
We have a divided nation because people like her, and believe me, She has tremendous hate in her heart. And when she said deplorables, she meant it. And when she said irredeemable, they're irredeemable. You didn't mention that. But when she said they're irredeemable, to me, that might have been even worse.
In the days after the first debate, you sent out a series of tweets from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., including one that told people to check out a sex tape. Is that the discipline of a good leader?
No, it wasn't check out a sex tape. It was just take a look at the person that she built up to be this wonderful Girl Scout, who was no Girl Scout. By the way, just so you understand, now, tweeting happens to be a modern-day form of communication. I mean, you can like it or not like it. I have, between Facebook and Twitter, I have almost 25 million people.
Secretary Clinton, does Mr. Trump have the discipline to be a good leader?
No.
Oh, I'm shocked to hear that.
Perhaps the most important aspect of this election is the Supreme Court justice. What would you prioritize as the most important aspect of selecting a Supreme Court justice?
I want to appoint Supreme Court justices who understand the way the world really works, because I think the current court has gone in the wrong direction. I would like the Supreme Court to understand that voting rights are still a big problem in many parts of our country. I want a Supreme Court that will stick with Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose, and I want a Supreme Court that will stick with marriage equality. And I regret deeply that the Senate has not done its job, and they have not permitted a vote on the person that President Obama, a highly qualified person, they've not given him a vote to be able to have the full complement of 9 Supreme Court justices.
I am looking to appoint judges very much in the mold of Justice Scalia, and I've actually picked 20 of them. They'll respect the Second Amendment and what it stands for, what it represents.
We have one more question from Ken Bone about energy policy. Ken?
What steps will your energy policy take to meet our energy needs, while at the same time remaining environmentally friendly and minimizing job loss for fossil power plant workers?
We are killing, absolutely killing, our energy business in this country. Now, I'm all for alternative forms of energy, including wind, including solar, etc. But we need much more than wind and solar. There is a thing called clean coal. Coal will last for 1,000 years in this country. I will bring our energy companies back. They'll be able to compete. They'll make money. They'll pay off our national debt. They'll pay off our tremendous budget deficits, which are tremendous. You take a look at what's happening to steel and the cost of steel, and China dumping vast amounts of steel all over the United States, which essentially is killing our steel workers and our steel companies.
China is illegally dumping steel in the United States, and Donald Trump is buying it to build his buildings. I think we can be the 21st century clean energy superpower and create millions of new jobs and businesses. But I also want to be sure that we don't leave people behind. That's why I'm the only candidate from the very beginning of this campaign who had a plan to help us revitalize coal country.
My question to both of you is, regardless of the current rhetoric, would either of you name one positive thing that you respect in one another?
I respect his children. His children are incredibly able and devoted, and I think that says a lot about Donald.
Well, I consider her statement about my children to be a very nice compliment. I don't know if it was meant to be a compliment, but it is a great. I'm very proud of my children. I will say this about Hillary. She doesn't quit. She doesn't give up. I respect that. I tell it like it is. She's a fighter. I disagree with much of what she's fighting for. I do disagree with her judgment in many cases, but she does fight hard, and she doesn't quit, and she doesn't give up, and I consider that to be a very good trait.